From the Broadcast Center at BCIT's Burnaby Campus, this is All Talk Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Good afternoon, I'm Carissa Cheng with your 12 o'clock news and sports updates. Persistent hot and dry conditions has sparked a wildfire in Coquitlam's Minnehaha Regional Park. The BC Wildfire Service lists this 11-hectare fire as burning out of control. The Metro Vancouver Regional District posted an update on social media saying that firefighting crews are working in extremely steep and challenging terrain to suppress the fire. According to information from Environment Canada, record high temperatures hit BC over the weekend. Communities from Vancouver Island to the interior reported their hottest October 1st on record. 24.8 degrees was reported in the Clearwater area, setting a new record in 99 years. Interior Health is shutting down rumors that drug ivermectin can prevent or treat COVID-19. The health authority says flyers are circulating around Kelowna and advertising the sale of ivermectin. They say this drug is meant to be a prescription antiseptic drug for parasitic worm infections, and using it for other purposes may cause serious health problems. This reminder comes after a spike in reports at poison centers. RCMP are condemning a group of teenagers who reportedly drove around Campbell River trying to start fights with homeless people. The police say the teenagers were highly intoxicated and a few of them were arrested. Constable Murray Tyre says the teens are, quote, a group of privileged youth taking on some of our town's least privileged. Winnipeg police are now investigating the death of a First Nations woman as a homicide case. The woman was identified as 41-year-old Melissa Cook. She was hospitalized in early July and passed away from severe burns on August 20th. The police say Cook was homeless and living in encampments. Over the past 2 weeks, thousands of Iranians all over the world have been protesting against the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, an Iranian woman who was killed while in the custody of the Iranian morality police. A demonstration just took place over the weekend in Vancouver. Shivani Joshi speaks to an Iranian Canadian to find out how the community is feeling.
On Saturday, the Iranian community came out to build a human chain from the art gallery all the way to Stanley Park. They were showing solidarity with the people of Iran who are rallying against the Iranian regime for restricting personal freedoms. Parisa Moshfegh, a young woman who is supporting the demonstrations in Vancouver, says,
Liberal Eleanor Sturko is the newest elected member in the legislature starting this fall. She was sworn in by Legislature Clerk Kate Ryan Lloyd. Ryan Lloyd says Sturko is the first elected official in Canada to pledge allegiance to King Charles.
Today, as we acknowledge the passing of our former monarch, our new member of the Legislative Assembly will be pledging loyalty to His Majesty, King Charles III, the first change of this kind in over 70 years, and I'm told is a first in Canada for a newly elected member.
BC Premier John Horgan will step down as a new Democrat leader once his party elects a new leader on December 3rd. It's Election Day in Quebec, and polling stations are open from 9:30 a.m. to 8 p.m. Adults who work full-time or part-time are eligible to 4 hours to vote with no pay reduction or penalty. Be prepared for long lineups since there is a worker shortage at the polls. The U.S. Supreme Court is turning down appeals related to a federal ban on bump stocks for guns. Reporter Elizabeth Schultz with more.
In a major win for gun safety advocates, the Supreme Court rejected 2 appeals by gun owners seeking to overturn the federal government's ban on the sale of bump stocks. Bump stocks allow semi-automatic firearms to shoot more than 1 shot with a single pull of a trigger. They were banned after the 2017 Las Vegas shooting massacre. The Supreme Court didn't elaborate on its decision not to hear arguments on the challenges to the federal ban.
The court will be hearing arguments for the first time since issuing a landmark ruling stripping away women's constitutional protections for abortion. U.S. President Joe Biden is going to Puerto Rico today to assess damages from Hurricane Fiona. Reporter Karen Travers with more.
President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden traveled to Puerto Rico today to see firsthand the damage from Hurricane Fiona. They'll meet with families and community leaders impacted by the storm and participate in a community service project to help pack bags with food and other essential items. The president will also receive a briefing on recovery efforts. Mr. Biden will announce the federal government will send to Puerto Rico more than $60 million in funding from last year's bipartisan infrastructure law to shore up levees, strengthen flood walls, and create a new flood warning system to help the island better prepare for future storms. Karen Travers, ABC News, Washington.
Brazil presidential race heads to runoff. Sylvia Sena has more.
Brazil's top 2 presidential candidates will be facing each other in a runoff vote. The now President Jair Bolsonaro is running against left-leaning Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. The result of this election can affect the Brazilian immigration to Canada. According to immigration consultant Armando Stocco, if Lula wins the election, immigration numbers will increase. Sylvia Sena, 1680, The Crow.
So, Sylvia, what would be the reason for immigration numbers to increase?
Hello, Carissa. So, according to Stocco, people will try to leave Brazil because they feel the future in the country is unstable, and they are also worried about socialism being implemented there. That is if Lula wins.
I know this is a very polarized election, but do they already have a prediction on who might win?
So it's still pretty early to say anything about that, but pre-election polls show Lula on the lead. However, the results last night turned out to be very tight. Back to you, Carissa.
Thank you, Sylvia. Pulitzer Prize winner and New York Times reporter Maggie Haberman published a new book about Donald Trump's presidency. She says she discussed a classified documents issue with him at Mar-a-Lago.
He starts out with the quick denial, where I asked him on a lark, did you take documents? Just knowing how proud he was of things like the Kim Jong-un letters. And he said nothing of great urgency, no. And then he volunteers something about the Kim Jong-un letters. Hard to know what he was saying. And I said, you took those with you, or you were allowed to take those with you. And he kept talking. And when he registered my surprise, then he said, no, those are in the archives.
Now moving on to sports. Whit Merrifield of the Toronto Blue Jays hit a home run in the bottom of the 3rd inning to tie the game yesterday at 2. Toronto is coming closer to a home field advantage by beating the Boston Red Sox 6-3.
Rocks into the Y, the 0-1. Swinging a long fly ball. Deep left field. That's a no-doubter. Second deck for Whit Merrifield. 5th home run with the Blue Jays.
The Toronto Blue Jays are playing against the Baltimore Orioles at Oriole Park today at 4:05 p.m. The Jays will have to secure a win today to guarantee home field advantage during the wild card playoffs. The Jays haven't played a playoff game in Toronto since 2016. The wild card playoffs start this Friday, October 7th. Now on to the weather forecast for the rest of the day. Temperatures are set to hit a high of 24 degrees with a 0 chance of rain. There will be sun throughout the rest of the week, so don't forget your sunscreen. That was your news updates to 12 o'clock. I'm Carissa Cheng for 1680 The Crow.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.
It's extremely important for people to stay healthy and to stay active as much as possible.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikakane.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretnero.
And I'm Radhika Sikakane. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.
Hello, you're listening to Companion Call on 1680 The Crow. I'm your host, Gurpreet Kambo, with my producer, Bonnie Chakawa, in the producer's booth over there. We're talking about neurodivergence in the post-secondary setting. I was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder as an adult in university, not at BCIT, somewhere else, but I went back to school to finish a bachelor's degree in my late 20s, after having had a rough time with it when I was younger, multiple goes at post-secondary as an adult. Amanda McKierney is a queer-identifying autistic woman studying at BCIT in environmental public health, and she's also elected as the Vice President, Equity and Sustainability in the BCIT Student Association. And Joanna Angelidis is the Associate Director in the Accessibility Services Department at BCIT. She also previously worked in the public school system. So, I welcome. Thank you for joining us today. So I will start with this. So Amanda, you've made autism and neurodivergence, in some of our previous conversations, I understand it's one of the focuses of your role as VP Equity. Why is that?
During my first year of my program, I actually faced quite a lot of barriers to being able to get an education, per se. There was some bullying from some of the students in my classroom. It could have gone to Human Rights Tribunal. I didn't take it there because everybody in the program is a lot younger than me, and quite frankly, these girls, the frontal cortex isn't quite developed yet, and I don't think that they need a permanent blip on their record when they're still technically children. So I worked with the department to try and come up with a better solution, which basically was bringing in somebody who was able to do a lecture on neurodivergence, because when we go out into the workforce as public health officers, we're going to be working with all types of public. That includes neurodivergent people. And so I thought it would be really important for everybody to learn about it early on and know how to deal with different situations. The problem is the department didn't make this lecture mandatory. They were able to file paperwork to get a grant to cover the cost because apparently it was very expensive. But at the end of the day, the 2 instructors that should have been there and the 5 women who should have been there, or 5 girls, didn't show up. So after that, I didn't really want to come to school anymore. And that's not fair to me. I fought really hard to get here. It took me, like you said, in and out of university, it took me 20 years to finish my first degree. I didn't know I was autistic till I was 33. I got diagnosed after my my almost 4-year-old daughter was diagnosed. I had been searching for answers for 3 years at this point. And that gave me the last piece of the puzzle to do more research. And when I started reading about it, I was like, oh my God, this is it. And then I started reading more and I was like, why does this sound like me? Now, my struggles when I was a child were a little different than Anna, because it's a spectrum. You talk to one autistic person, you've talked to one autistic person. You don't know, everybody's different. But I started remembering how I was in school and I didn't have friends and I read at recess instead of playing with the kids, and sometimes I asked questions that other people thought were inappropriate. But it was just curiosity on my part. I didn't realize that what I was saying was not nice. Social interactions were completely foreign to me.
Right. And Joanna, I want to bring you into the conversation here. So, in our conversation, I understand as an administrator that you've also been an advocate for accessibility and for neurodivergent students. Tell us a little about what brings you to this work.
It's such a good question. I think from the time I started my career as a teacher years ago, I started as a high school teacher and then did elementary and so on. I think there's always a part of me that held a deep belief in the inclusion of everyone and in systems, environments that allow for everyone to be themselves.
The atmosphere is definitely changing. It helps when you have a lot of parents who are realizing as their children are being diagnosed that they are also on the spectrum. And so now you've got parents fighting with their kids, not just for their kids. Because at the end of the day, these children are going to grow up to be adults. People who think differently than 10 neurotypical people at the table, then you're getting new ideas for how to do things and new innovations for how to solve problems or create things that are going to make our jobs easier as humans and things that nobody would ever thought about. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Right. And what do you think, Joanna? Like, is this something in the public school system and in the post-secondary system that there's sort of a greater understanding than there was 20 or 30 years ago?
Absolutely, there is. Definitely in the public school system, there's attention to language, language that isn't used any longer. There's attention and priority on, reviewing our structures and improving them. But we're not done yet, right? There's still more for us collectively to do.
So much more.
Yeah. I read a book recently, and I can't remember the title of it now, but it talks about the history of public education in Canada. It's called A Class of Their Own. So he talks about
the special needs class, right?
Yes, and he focuses on Ontario, but it's across Canada and across the USA.
We had
it's
them
applicable.
in my school when I was in school.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he talks about, this language is just totally unacceptable, but he talks about students who are deficient. I'm pretty sure that's the word he uses in there.
It's better than the other word.
Right, which was also used. And then he talks about how they built this structure. This is so not he needs to talk about it himself because I'm not going to do it justice. But he talks about how the education system was built, I can't remember the exact year, 1910, 1920. It's built. And then within a few short years, there's recognition that it doesn't work for everybody. But instead of restructuring it at that time, there's this creation of this, these are the students that don't fit because there's something wrong with them, and they go over here.
Well, you got
K to 12.
When you think about why education systems and why school was formed in the first place, in particular, the lower levels of school, it was to basically train kids to grow up and be worker bees, right? So when you have kids in there that aren't learning the same as the other ones, they're probably not going to be worker bees. So you want to hide them.
When we look at where we are, they're like a continuum from this place that was super exclusionary and quite frankly discriminatory. We're constantly improving, and it's taking much longer than it should. I'm sure, but we're not there yet. Right?
We're not even close.
Right, exactly. So knowing this here, right, where we came from, I think is super important.
So it's all political, right? I feel like it's not just, that a neurodivergent person has a disability because they function differently, right? It's as I mentioned in the introduction, that it feels like this is kind of like a growing movement, right? That the society needs to adjust itself.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, we're trying to operate in a world that was not created for how we work.
Right. There's actually a local autism advocacy group called Square Peg Society.
I joined it last week.
Right.
Cool.
What does that mean to you, the phrase square peg?
I don't fit in the standard box. I'm totally okay with that. I own my authenticity now. I'm not masking anymore. It's doing that is exhausting.
What's masking? Tell me about that.
Masking is something that a lot of mostly autistic women do in order to try and fit in. Because, especially for women, when you don't fit in, life is hell, literally hell. I can tell you that growing up with no friends was not fun. Now that I think back, like, I don't have any really long standing relationships with people. They've just kind of floated into my life and then floated out. Like, people have needed me around briefly, but I don't really need anybody. I'm totally cool with being alone.
Is that something that you learned, or is that something that you was inherently a part of your personality?
It's part of my personality. My ex-husband, we went hiking last year, I think. We still go and do stuff with kids, but he and I took our youngest son out for a hike, and I don't like they don't keep up with me. And then he looks at me, he's like, there you go again. And I'm like, what? And he's like, you hang out with people by yourself. He's like, it was always like that. So I'll go out and do things with people, but I'm doing my own thing beside them, and I don't even notice. But sometimes they do.
What's an example of masking?
I don't know how to describe it. Have you seen it, Joanna?
Totally. I think I have. So like you recognize that a certain way of being is the norm and it's what's accepted. And so because you want to be included, because generally we all do, right? We're social beings, then you will hide something about yourself and conduct yourself in a way that fits that norm better, right? So you'll be accepted, I think. Is that
Thank
fair?
you. Yeah. That basically described it pretty well. I'm not really good at that.
And it's a trauma response, isn't it?
It can be for people who have experienced trauma in childhood. But when you're autistic and you haven't experienced trauma, it's still applicable.
Right. Yeah, and my experience of masking was that it was almost like a brute force response to like certain social situations. It's like you only learned this because of making the same mistake like many times again and again. And that doesn't necessarily mean you understood it. It was just like almost a trial and error kind of thing.
Yep.
It's exhausting too.
It is
right?
totally
Yeah.
exhausting.
It's a lot of energy output.
Yeah. And so Joanna, like I understand that you've worked with a lot of like kids and whatnot in the K-12 system, like neurodivergent kids, right? Like does a lot of this resonate with a lot of the kids that you worked with?
Yeah, I would say it does for sure, right? So, being at school and sometimes recognizing that there are things about you that are different, sometimes not recognizing it. And then being in an environment that without certain things in place or certain adjustments can be very challenging, right? It can be exhausting and these are things that students have shared with me or maybe my observations as an adult, or things that parents have shared. So exhausting, but you might not know why, right? You might not know that it's the social interactions that everybody else seemingly goes through and enjoys, but for you might be challenging or more energy output. It could be noise. It could be the lighting. It could be the playground that is challenging, right? Or high schools where you're going in and out. So all these things that, without certain adjustments could actually unintentionally often serve to, limit someone's ability to function happily, calmly, at the very least, but certainly thriving and succeeding at what we should be achieving.
Right.
To add to what Joanna's saying, like I think back to my childhood and adolescence and stuff, and not knowing that this was a thing. Girls didn't get diagnosed back then, and diagnosing boys was rare. But for me, thinking back to all of the problems I had, if I had known and had some understanding, I wouldn't have dropped out of school at 16. I wouldn't have had to keep trying to go back to finish high school. Graduated as a mature student. I'm super smart, and I wanted to be a doctor.
What a tough thing to sort of think about, to sort of mourn what you think, like, if I'd known before, you know, like what I could have done or like who I could have been. Like, I feel like that's a sort of a mourning process that like a lot of neurodivergent folks go through.
When people uncover stuff about themselves that is particularly concerning or shocking, definitely like feel the feelings. They're valid. And yeah, like we got the short end of the stick, but on the other side of that, it's brought me where I am today, and I'm fighting for this stuff now so that my daughters don't have to do it. Because my 12-year-old, she's going to be graduating in 4.5 years. Holy shit. Sorry. But 4.5 years is like, it goes so fast. You blink and they grow up and they're gone. And like, I have 3 adult children. I don't know how that happened. And my 22-year-old is pretty sure she's autistic. But when I took her to get an assessment 2 years ago from a doctor here who wasn't really good with diagnosing adults, and especially with women, he diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder instead, even though I gave him all this evidence and told him how she was growing up. He was like, nope, I'm not convinced. And I was like, what? Like, are you kidding me right now? And like when I took Anna to a doctor in New Brunswick right after we moved there, this is like, she got seen by somebody here in BC, and then we moved to New Brunswick and got seen by somebody else there. The guy here said, she has a few red flags, but I don't want to diagnose her. Take her to New Brunswick. I showed him pictures of food she bit into shapes and then lined up on the table in patterns. And she took apart a whole roll of toilet paper and laid rows of squares over every surface of the bathroom. It was like the Twilight Zone. And videos of her meltdowns. And this guy looks at all this stuff that I'm showing him, and he says, well, she's pretty quirky, but she's not autistic. She can't be autistic because she's a girl. This kid was almost 4, and she wasn't going to get any help because in New Brunswick, once you start school, there's no help for you. So I phoned Dr. Hilary Cartwright's office. She's one of like the biggest names in like autism research and stuff in New Brunswick, in Fredericton. And her receptionist answered, which she never usually did. And I was just hysterical. And she's like, calm down. And I told her what happened. And she's like, I'll call you back in a few minutes. She called me back. They had a 2-year wait list. She's like, can you come in 4 weeks?
Wow.
Because if Anna didn't get an assessment and didn't get a diagnosis and didn't get a little bit of help before she started school, who knows where she would have been. And they knew that because she was older. They made a space for her. And the relief that I got was just so profound.
Where are we moving towards as a society for neurodivergent folks, and what do you think needs to change?
I think, and I'm being a bit repetitive here, but I think it's all of us orienting from a place of authentic inclusion of everyone. I think that's really critical. And then from that will flow, things like our systemic things, right? And our systems and our procedures and all that kind of stuff will flow from that. So once we're oriented in that way, we'll look at, what are the policies that we need to continue to revise? What policies are missing that we need to have in place? If we look at a post-secondary institution as an example, what is it that instructors are doing already that needs to stay, and what is not being done that would need to be done so that we are living out our commitment to being truly inclusive. I also think, and that's part of that commitment to being truly inclusive, is that the stigma, disappears. That we can all feel comfortable just being our authentic selves, right? And the diversity amongst us. And then I think over the years, we'll start to see, as students go through our systems, we'll start to see more and more diversity in the various places that adults contribute to our communities. I know there's brilliant, bright, wonderful people who are not as successful as they could and should be in our high schools, and maybe don't make it to post-secondary, or they get to post-secondary and then they're not as successful as they can and should be. And then when we look at what that means, in terms of who are our doctors, who are our lawyers, or like whatever, right? Like, we need diversity there as well. So I think that's that is we continue to live out year after year after year this journey to being more deeply and authentically inclusive. We'll start to see that starting to have really good impact for us as we have true diversity in all the things that adults do in a society. And I don't know if I made that point really clearly, but I think if we only have a certain kind of brain or a certain kind of way of thinking or being in all these adult roles that we hold, then that doesn't serve us at all. We need that diversity.
Otherwise, we'd like robots.
Yeah.
Where's the fun in that?
Right.
And I mean, it's all incremental, right? And I mean, I know that's just the way our society works, but I think a lot of people are going to still go through a lot of trauma while that incremental change happens.
Yeah. Totally. Zero tolerance needs to actually be enforced. Sometimes there's bullying that happens and nobody ever acknowledges that it's really an issue. Like, I still know parents who end up switching their kids' schools because the school isn't taking it seriously. Or like my daughter, I love her, holy man, she's 12, and she said, like, there's been a couple of times at school in the last 2 years where she's seen kids get picked on. She's the kid that goes in there and interrupts it. The feeling of being left out, even when you don't really care, because I don't really care, but when they make it like when those people make it obvious that you're an issue, it's like, what the hell?
Any last words from either of you? Last thoughts?
I think that these conversations, or conversations like this, I think are critical. I think hearing the stories, and giving ourselves time to reflect on them and look at what that means for us, and what do we change about what we're doing and how we're doing it. I think that's important, right? Conversations like this.
Absolutely. And like, to go one step further, as the VP of Equity and Sustainability, one of my objectives is actually to get cultural safety and trauma-informed care and neurodiversity training to be implemented into the curriculums here at BCIT. And hopefully beyond that. Like, I have my sights set on like actual provincial policy and then national. Because this is ridiculous. We start with education, right? Education changes people. People can't be excluding people that they learn and understand. And I think that that's where we start.
Right. All right. Well, thank you to the both of you. And I'm really glad that I could bring the both of you together and have you guys meet each other and talk. It's like having a meeting of the minds about neurodivergence, in a sense. So I really appreciate you guys having this, having this very candid conversation here. Thank you for joining me. And that was Joanna Angelidis and Amanda McKerney. My name is Gurpreet Kambo, and my producer in the producer booth over there is Bonnie Chakawa. This is Companion Call on 1680 The Crow.
breastfeeding is for most moms really hard, and it is a very intense period.
Had a really challenging and difficult breastfeeding experience.
Just a special connection you have with your baby.
Ultimately, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was harder than giving birth.
You smell him, your breast milk changes, and it makes antibodies. Come on in. Hi, I'm Tessa, owner of Mama Milk Fairy. Welcome to my studio. This is where I make all my precious jewelry. With Mama Milk Fairy, I make breast milk jewelry and breast milk keepsakes. And I started this business to help moms commemorate their breastfeeding journeys. Because breastfeeding is for most moms really hard, and it is a very intense period, and it's something that we would like to have something from once it's over. It's a special time during a mom's life, a special time during a baby's life. So moms, they send me their breast milk in like, I'll try to cover the name a bit, like in a breast milk storage bag like this, and then they put it in some Ziploc bags because I send it by mail, just prevent leaking. And I then preserve it with my special preserving powder, and then it turns out to something like this. I don't know if you're able to see it. Is it like preserved breast milk? Once I've preserved it, I grind it really fine in the mortar and pestle, and I set it in resin, and epoxy resin. And many moms want to add some color, or they would like to add a little shimmer or whatever. Everything is possible, so whatever they want. Or I add a lock of hair from their baby, or dried umbilical cord. And once that's finished, I set it in either solid gold or sterling silver jewelry, setting in a pendant, or in earrings, or a ring. There you go. So pretty. I've put a lot of things in there. The one that recently that I have been asked only once was a single eyelash for a mother's son from her baby, because he has such a beautiful big eyelashes. So she literally gave me one eyelash to work with, and it turned out really well. I have some pictures of it on my social media. It was just one beautiful black eyelash on there. How hard was it?
Oh, very hard. It made me very nervous, because usually if they give me locks of hair, I have some more hairs to work with, or I can move it around a little bit. And with this, I only had one.
Lucas, can you go with Papa? So the main challenge for me was that our oldest son had trouble latching when he was just born. The first few days went very smooth, very easygoing, and then suddenly I started to have troubles with his latch. Well, I didn't know that at the time, but I started to have cracked nipples and started to bleed, and up till a point that it hurted so much that I couldn't feed him anymore. Another difficult moment when I was breastfeeding was when I went back to work. I had to start pumping because he went to daycare, and at that time I was working full time, and that was a lot of work, and it was really hard. And I don't know, I think that pumping mothers need more respect.
I was Googling breast milk jewelry, and her name came up, or her website came up.
Oh.
I had a really challenging and difficult breastfeeding experience, and it was just really, really, really hard. But just having something to remind me, of everything that I went through, and I just really wanted some type of keepsake. I mean, I think for me, I know when I opened the jewelry, I still get emotional thinking about it, just because my journey was so challenging and not at all what I had hoped for or anticipated. But I know when I opened the jewelry box, I cried. I just burst into tears, because it just reminded me of how hard I'd worked for something that was so important to me. And it was the way I wanted to mother. I wanted to breastfeed my child, and it didn't totally work the way I wanted it to, but looking at the jewelry, it just really reminded me of it was our experience, even if it wasn't the best experience, but it was our journey between me and my son, and it meant a lot to me to be able to even breastfeed him for the short amount of time that I did. The whole journey feels like it's all wrapped up in one piece of jewelry. And then she also gifted me a small little heart to go with it, which was amazing and such a beautiful surprise. It really meant a lot to me that she did that. So, yeah.
Try to hang in it on your own, and there's a lot of help out there. It's more and more common, and people are supporting breastfeeding now. There are lots of doulas, midwives, lactation specialists that can help. There are a lot of support groups, and you're not alone. So a lot of it's very normal that it doesn't go smooth and easy, and that's okay.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, blast off!
first started playing music with Charlie, specifically punk music. Loved punk rock. And then one day we were like, oh, let's go see the Pixies, because they're coming to Vancouver. They're playing with Weezer, another 90s alternative band. Afterwards, Charlie came up to me and was like, dude, like, we should start a band. Like, we should actually try and do music. That'd be so cool. Like, let's do it.
All right, all right, all right, all right, all right. Yeah, why not? All right, this one's called Slap Bye Baby. He said, babe, I want to be in that ass like a parasite. How do you think my touch is what heaven's like? How do you know like they scream when I go for the throat? How do you know what it's like to watch blood pour on my nose?
And so we go through that first quarantine, and it was a search for a drummer, because it was me and Zach on guitar. I was doing most of the singing, Charlie was on bass.
I was learning guitar and Lars was learning all kinds of instruments, so we just kind of messed around. And then it kind of got stale after a while because we couldn't really work off each other in that particular arrangement.
And we were just like desperate for someone who would be able to play drums, and then we'd be good to go, right? And so probably the most musical person in our grade at the time was a certain man named Knight O'Connor, who played guitar, played bass, and played the drums.
So, I mean, I knew everybody from high school. I knew Lars, Zach, and Charlie. And I knew that they were playing music together. And I knew that there was a party coming up that Charlie was throwing. So I went to that. And I managed to corner Lars and Charlie. And I was like, hey, you know, I know how to play drums. And I heard that you guys are down a drummer. I can play drums for you if you'd like that.
We started going, and Knight is a pretty rough drummer, and it was fun, but we were like, okay, this is a good place for this band to start. Like, this will work, we just gotta give it time and learn stuff. And we were like, all right, like, let's take a little break, right?
And then we figured it out, because Knight's a way better bassist than he is a drummer. Lars is a way better drummer than he is guitarist. I moved to keyboard because I'm much better with that than bass. And Zach stayed on guitar because he's so good.
And then we like played the best I'd ever played up at that point in any group setting ever. Played some of the most fun music, rough and raw, but exciting and new and fun. And we knew we would never go back to the old instruments. From that point on, we were like stuck in those spots. But I'd say our biggest influence was coming from Pink Floyd. 'Cause we adored Pink Floyd as the typical high school stoners we were. We loved Pink Floyd, and we'd sit there and listen to Dark Side of the Moon or The Wall and dedicate hours to it and stuff. You know, way more important than schoolwork at the time. You know, you gotta get your listens in on some Pink Floyd records, you know. But as to who I would compare us to and who we sound like the most, well, we get a lot of people who say we sound like the Doors.
I've heard from a lot of people that we apparently sound like the Doors in terms of our musical arrangement.
Which is funny because I'm not even that big of a Doors fan. But Charlie's a massive Doors fan, and once again, that's where the Doors got their sound, was through those keys and stuff.
I don't think a lot of people have an answer for Knight's singing. He kind of just sings like Knight, he just shouts. I like it.
As far as genre goes, Lars and I came up with psychedelic funk and punk.
So a lot of bands, whether or not they're a one-hit wonder or whatever, a lot of bands have that song, like the song, their song. It's a song that people say, oh yeah, they sing blank. For Queen, it's probably Bohemian Rhapsody. For Led Zeppelin, you have to say it's Stairway to Heaven. Like Nirvana's It Smells Like Teen Spirit. So if I asked you, what's your song? What's the song for Big Long Baby?
Bugs.
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 Bugs?
But who gives a shit about insects?
I wrote Bugs about drug use and how it kind of affected me and how, there's that blasé attitude. I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. Roaches in my lung, roaches in my heart, kickstart. But it's about drugs, and it's got that kind of like evil feeling to it, about how it's super fast paced, and then it's, you're getting hit with it.
Give a shit about insects? Think you can't do what? We don't take care of Terraria. Give a shit about insects? Think you can't do what?
That was the easiest song we've ever written too, and I think we finished that song in like three band practices. We actually like completed that song with the words, with everything. Yeah, it was by far the easiest song we've ever written, and the most excited I think we've ever been writing a song. It was very fun to write that one, because we were like, fuck, this is cool.
So I remember playing it, and I just sat there for, must have been like half an hour just trying to work it out. And then I got like the verse chorus down, and then I wrote this like slow, heavy part. And I was like, this is great. So I recorded it and I sent it to the band, and they're like, that's fucking awesome. Yeah, I just really channeled how I was feeling into the words and made a singable melody that still kind of felt punky and had that attitude. And then I brought the words into practice, and then we played it together, and it was done. That was, I think, probably one of the first songs that we sat back and were really proud of.
From the Broadcast Center at BCIT's Burnaby Campus, this is All Talk Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Good afternoon, I'm Carissa Cheng with your 1 o'clock news updates. A court challenge is prompted by the order to remove tents from Vancouver's downtown east side during the summer. 2 women who were living in the tents along Hastings Street filed a petition for a review of the order. The petition argues that the residents didn't receive notice and alternative options were not considered. The City of Vancouver's fire chief issued the order on July 25th over extreme fire and safety concerns. The hot and dry conditions in BC has sparked a wildfire in a Coquitlam Regional Park. The BC Wildfire Service lists the 11-hectare fire at Minaka-Hada Regional Park as burning out of control. The Metro Vancouver Regional District posted an update on social media saying that firefighting crews are working in extremely steep and challenging terrain to suppress the fire. The British Columbia government is providing more mental health and substance use services for inmates leaving jail. Mental Health and Addictions Minister Sheila Malcolmson says that inmates struggling with mental health and substance use will be supported after they leave jail by transition teams connected to all 10 of the province correctional centers. That is an increase from inmates at 5 facilities getting help with housing and healthcare services. The service time length has also been tripled to 90 days. Malcolmson adds that more staff are being hired for transitional teams. These staff members include social workers, nurses, and peer support workers. These services are being bolstered based on recommendations in a recent report by a former Vancouver Deputy Police Chief and an expert on mental health and the criminal justice system. BC politicians are back in legislature today for a fall sitting to welcome Liberal Party Eleanor Sturko. This fall sitting will also mark Premier John Horgan's step down as the new Democrat leader. The United Conservative Party leadership candidate Danielle Smith says she will not call for an early election if she becomes Alberta's next premier. She says that Albertans tend to punish leaders who call an early election.
I think that when early election calls occur, the public is suspicious. They think that there's some advantage that the person is trying to gain. And I think we've seen that oftentimes when you hold an early election, it happen at the federal level and at the provincial level, you either lose ground or end up getting a reduced majority.
Smith says that she would wait until the next scheduled election in May 2023. Now for international news. UN officials say that nearly 6 million Pakistani flood survivors will face a serious food crisis in the next 3 months. Reporters Charles de la Desma with more.
On Saturday, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs announced the current floods are expected to exacerbate food insecurity for around 5.7 million people in flood-affected areas in Pakistan. Now, Julian Hanis, resident coordinator in Pakistan, says more funds are needed to prevent a second wave of destruction from waterborne and other diseases. A recent appeal for 160 million in emergency funding, Hanis says, has not proved to be enough. Agencies need over 800 million amid rising deaths from disease. I'm Charles de la Desma.
U.S. President Joe Biden is going to Puerto Rico today to assess damages from Hurricane Fiona. Biden says that Puerto Rico, quote, haven't been taken very good care of. Reporter Karen Travers with more.
President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden traveled to Puerto Rico today to see firsthand the damage from Hurricane Fiona. They'll meet with families and community leaders impacted by the storm and participate in a community service project to help pack bags with food and other essential items. The president will also receive a briefing on recovery efforts. Mr. Biden will announce the federal government will send to Puerto Rico more than $60 million in funding from last year's bipartisan infrastructure law to shore up levees, strengthen flood walls, and create a new flood warning system to help the island better prepare for future storms. Karen Travers, ABC News, Washington.
Kim Kardashian is being barred from promoting cryptocurrencies for 3 years. She will also have to pay a $1 million fine to settle federal charges for recommending a crypto security to her followers without specifying that she was being paid to do so. Now moving on to your weather updates for the day. It is currently 20 degrees with a sunny sky. I'm Carissa Cheng for 1680 The Crow.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.